Welcome back to Reform Millennials, a podcast where we discuss the intersection of markets, politics, and pop culture. Please remember that the content of this show is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing should be considered financial or tax advice. Please consult a professional before you make any investment decisions. To put it lightly, an action-packed episode. Last week, I wrote a memo. I first sent it out to clients, and then I threw a snippet up on LinkedIn, and it was titled, "The Year the Future Showed Up." And it actually frames our episode really well, because I think this is that statement is very true for the political situation we're currently in, or the political moment that we're currently in, and then also the technological paradigm change that we're also living through. So from a market's perspective and my perspective on a day-to-day basis, if you're looking at the broader market, everything looks relatively calm. You got a VIX roughly around 20, which is the trading average over the last 50 years. The TSX and S&P 500 are kind of chopping around and trying to find a price, but nothing too violent. It seems as though we've effectively survived a new geopolitical scare, maybe. And to me, the market kind of took a punch on the jaw, and it's still standing. The S&P 500 up on the year, the TSX up decently on the year, the rest of Europe and emerging markets also up, in a moment where we've seen a 100% depreciation, or roughly 80% increase in oil prices, or 40 to 80, depending on whether or not you're pricing it in real dollars in Brent or WTI. That is quite shocking. And I think if you were to tell most of the people that, they'd be surprised that the indexes have held up so well. However, if you take a peek under the hood of the S&P 500, and to a lesser extent the TSX, there's a very clear pain trade showing up. And I think it's caught a lot of investors off guard. Those that were fairly complacent and happy in owning a few of the big seven, so Microsoft specifically, and the broader software industry, have gotten absolutely wrecked. The amount of rotation out of software companies into hardware and the picks and shovels of the AI trade has been, I think, crippling for a lot of portfolio managers and a lot of investors. But it's quite clear that this is a rotation and a repricing, and capital goes to where the return is. And the AI story has been, I think it has taken a step forward in a sense that it is no longer about demos and it's not speculation anymore. It is very clearly real. And we are now in the middle of a massive infrastructure build out. TSMC is choking on the amount of demand for GPUs right now. Anthropic has tripled to 10x, depending on how you are valuing their annual revenue run rate. The amount of demand right now is unbelievable. And interestingly, as a result of this huge infrastructure build out, energy continues to be one of the leading performers from a sector perspective. So like capital is like water, it's flowing to the lowest point, and this is how new paradigms show return and performance. It goes to the main bottom layer, which is the build out phase. And we're going to continue to fill that cup up. We've seen this happen on multiple occasions, and there will be winners and there will be losers, but very clearly there's been a massive shift, and I think justifiably so, out of software into this real things layer. And interestingly, this has been completely foreign to anybody who has been operating in markets since 2008, 2010. Everybody got comfortable with new software as a service models, subscription models. That it was kind of the story of our entire 20s, hey Mel? And now we have this whole new reality. And certainly we're paying for things that way still, but the most important portion has now become compute rather than a layer of infrastructure, which I think is just kind of hilarious and unique. or not unique, but rather like back to where it all began when we were playing Sims on massive computers in our house. And now we have this new demand for hardware that just kind of escaped us for a while.
So there's no Rosebud cheat code in this economy.
I mean, unless you're Anthropic or OpenAI. But if markets weren't weird enough, I think it's actually only eclipsed by the politics in Canada. And this morning, I woke up to a Liberal Party that now has a 174-seat majority. I don't know how this happened, Mel, but we now have a majority government. Expectations are going to change. I would love to get your thoughts on, and this is, I'm stealing a quote from you, the kingdom of liberal majority.
Yeah. Well,
Tell me about what's happened.
I've been annoying anybody who will listen to me, which is not very many people, but it strikes me as just so fascinating. If you had two Venn diagrams, the Venn diagram of people in the United States who are protesting no kings, and the people who may also be doing that in Canada unknowingly, seeing how silly that is. But the big time sort of never conservative liberal folks, those two Venn diagrams would overlap. And I just find it to be a little bit ironic because there seems to be a sensitivity to how democracy unfolds in a way where we like certain aspects of our institutions and our democracy when they're serving our desires and not when they are not serving our desires. And I think that we look through in evaluating different political leaders in a way that is very different depending on what we've branded them in society as being. I actually don't agree with your point that the expectations are going to change. I think that the expectations should change because for Carney, at least, he doesn't have the drag of not having the majority. So in an ideal world, he would be able to move quickly on things that are going to be nation building projects and do that. But I don't actually think voters are going to expect that of him. And I think that's probably one of the bigger problems that we have in society right now, in Canadian society, this sort of complacency of all we really want is to not have a political leader that's like Trump, and the rest we could care less about. And we've talked about this several times on the podcast, how that has resulted in, low GDP growth, how that has resulted in human capital drain from Canada to the United States and other parts of the world. But I think that in my world, it's my responsibility to help my clients look at political risk and what does this mean and how is this going to make things different. I struggle to convince myself that it's going to be any different than it already has been. I think that when Carney won his government with 169 seats basically almost a year ago, that government was just as a majority government, if not actually, than it is today. I think what we do see in the Canadian sort of cultural zeitgeist is a huge shift in the goalposts of what is or is not acceptable. I'd be remiss to not talk about the fact that, well, how does Carney have this majority? He's done it through a combination of floor crossings, 5 of them since last year, that have been a combination of Conservative and NDP floor crossings. So he's really attracting people that come from polar opposites of the political spectrum, as well as through the 3 by-elections that happened last night, 2 in Ontario, 1 in Quebec, that he secured all 3 of those. And so that's really how he's built his majority from the last election. I think that we can talk a little bit about the politics of what this means, but I would say this just solidifies what most of us already assumed, and that is we're not going to have a federal election for another 3 years. So we'll have a federal election in 2029, and we will just continue operating as we essentially have been operating. And kudos to where kudos is due. Mark Carney is way more of a political operator than I think a lot of us gave him credit for. I myself will even admit I was in the camp of thinking he's this economist that isn't going to succeed in politics. But I think he has proven, we can talk about whether or not this is good for our society, but in the game of politics, Carney is winning, and that's undeniable.
Yes. So he's competent. So now, where I refuse to sit is on the pessimist side of Canada currently. I just think that there's too much lining up that benefits us. So I have this, I say this a lot, especially in client meetings, that pessimists sound very smart and optimists make money. And if I'm approaching Canada here and I'm looking at a reality where our federal government can move faster, he's been in effectively, people have with their feet voted and decided that we are now going to have a liberal majority. They voted with their feet. They're going to assume that the Liberal Party is directionally where they align, and they want to that's where they're putting their vote. I believe that if we also agree that he was a very successful economist, he didn't come from a ton of money. He's made his way to the most powerful seat in Canadian politics. I'm optimistic, and I think encouraged by the fact that he is going to also be great for our economy. And now that he wields more power and can move quicker, he's going to do bigger and better things. That's where I choose to currently sit. And when I
have a question for you.
Yeah,
if you had to wave a wand of like what you think that the market needs to see from Canada in the next 3 years, what would those 3 things be?
I mean, one, they need to see fiscal constraint, which I believe they've actually showed at the federal level. So one, I think box checked. 2, a willingness to work with business. Now that is and I think what they want to see, especially from a Western Canadian capital flow perspective, I think what they really truly need to see is a willingness to unleash and get out of the way of our corporations, which would coincide with true infrastructure build out in the West. Mm-hmm. That to me would show that they're pragmatic and that they see the forest for the trees. They're not going to get bogged down by pandering to, we'll call like liberal ideology of the 2010s and early 2020s, and are going to truly build a stronger, more dynamic Canada. What does that actually mean in terms of infrastructure? That means pipelines. That means, to me, getting rid of an uncompetitive tax regime, and to me, green energy, we'll call it structure, in terms of like shipping lanes and those sorts of things. I think that would be a signal to American capital that we're ready to play ball again, like we were willing to do 15 years ago. And I'm optimistic that he's going to be willing to do that. Now, what event was it where there was all those people on stage with on stage for the Liberal Party a couple days ago? What was that event?
So the Liberals just had their convention in Montreal. So I know there was a lot. We talked about the NDP convention that happened in Manitoba a few weeks ago. The Liberals just had the same thing for their political party.
Okay, so I watched a good portion of those speeches, and that was gravely concerning for me.
Yes.
If that is the messaging to business, I'm clearly out to lunch in my optimism.
So I will say, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'll let you go.
So I will say that I'm going to try to not criticize the Liberals and the NDP for what they say at their conventions, because I have been begging people to not listen to what conservatives say at face value at our conventions, because these are 2 different groups of people. So I want to give the Liberals that benefit of the doubt as well. So
I understand they're rallying their base.
Yeah.
They're fundraising to an extent, but they're also sending a message. So it's hard for me to square that circle a little bit. Now, again, it is terribly unproductive as an investment manager or a business operator you need to see what they're actually doing. Don't get bogged down by what they're saying. Show me what they're actually doing, and that's what matters. Like Donald Trump is the king of making noise over here while he operates over here. And I think that every successful politician seems to do that. And it would be a bad idea for me to, or for anybody to take what they say at face value when they don't actually operate that way. Like, where's the money going? How is policy actually shaping? So for myself, I've long said I'm not going to critique policy or success until end of summer. But by then, if they don't have like meaningful Western infrastructure projects outlaid, I'm going to be very disappointed. And I think capital will be very, very upset as well. Because to me, we've actually seen some flows into the country. The TSX has done very well. I do believe that there's folks that are buying the story and the Mark Carney opportunity. And obviously the price of oil and commodities in general across the mining industry and housing with lumber prices, these things are all incentives, and I think an opportunity for us to go on a fairly significant commodity cycle and then economic boom. Canada often does very well during commodity cycles on the upside and build out cycles. That is a great moment for Canada. So if we can, again, capitalize on the presented opportunity, well, shoot, I think Carney can be great. So that's where I'm optimistic. I'd rather there be, especially at moments in which there's massive change in markets and in price, there be a majority government, because at least they can be fast and move and get things done. The last thing I would want during a period of massive technological innovation is a bogged down government that cannot move quickly. So I'm hopeful, and I think that this is probably best from an opportunity perspective, that we have this majority now that is out of the way. And when I said that the expectations change, well, they have from me. My expectations are now significantly higher. The excuses are out of the way, sir.
Mm-hmm.
So let's
you're saying something really interesting as well. I want to grab onto something that you talked about in terms of the Liberals of the sort of 2010s, like the Trudeau era. My sense on the Liberal Party over the past 2 decades is, up until Carney, and perhaps still a bit with Carney in power, the Liberals have been largely a party of ideology versus a party of implementation. And I think there's just a great business concept and just life concept that I always grab onto of what got you here won't get you there. The things that created the environment under which you were able to get this majority, that you were able to get these floor crossers, that you are, in your 4th governing term, the things that got you there are not going to get you to the next election. And I think that what you're saying, and I think part of the list that you outlined in terms of what markets are looking for, the time for ideology and talk is done. The time for implementation is now. And I think that part of the challenge, as you say, that is going to come from Carney, and I'm glad that your expectations are going to be higher for Carney. I think that they should be higher from all of us for Carney. But part of the challenge there is going to be what this recent sort of change has meant in Canadian politics is that the Canadian public is seeing just how much power that the political executive has and just how much power you actually do have in making things happen when you are the governing party. And that, as you say, is even more of a reason to not let the Liberal government off the hook when it comes to, we can't implement this, we can't implement that. Okay, but like, in order for the markets and in order for the public to actually believe that you are driving your own agenda and not primarily the agenda coming from political activists at your convention, is that implementation piece. And my worry is that Canada has been historically bad at implementation and execution. And I don't know that the tone from the top, by saying all of these things, is the whole story when it comes to our state capacity and ability to carry those things out. So that's what I'm watching. And I think that's what people should demand of their government. Stop telling me all of the things that you're going to do. Stop announcing all of the things that you want to do. Just do them and allow for the market to respond to those good things that you say you're going to do. by actually having them happen.
Okay, I'm going to iterate here a little bit. We have a segment 2 where I kind of just touched on at the beginning. I want to talk a little bit more about, all right, implementation. What does that look like? What is next now that they have this majority? So you're saying you're watching for implementation. What exactly are they going to implement?
Okay, so for example, we want to become a defense powerhouse. We want to increase so what levers are actually in the power of the government directly, and what levers are actually in the private sector, incentivizing them to behave that way? The government can control how much money we allocate to defense. And Carney has agreed to increase that. The NATO target's 2%, talks of 5%. So that's in the government's wheelhouse. So I'm going to look to the government to say, are you doing your part? What I am also going to look for is, where are you getting in the way of the role of the private sector and actually doing the things that you're going to do? Is there a unfavorable tax structure? Is there unfavorable regulatory burden on this sector? Do we have a human capital problem in terms of, okay, well, we don't have the proper funding for universities to train these people, et cetera? Like, this is where I think the government really needs to understand that your job is not actually done when you say we want this to be a thing. If you are genuinely trying to play a role in the economy where you're incentivizing certain kinds of behaviors, then you need to make sure that those incentive structures exist, and not just trust that you said, I'd love to be XYZ, except for I have created an environment that is wholly untenable for the people that I'm depending on to carry out that mission. So that's what I'm talking about, is like, there are things in the government's control that they should do, but there's a lot that's in their control that they are not the person that's actually responsible for carrying that stuff out. And so they need to check the box and sort of have almost like plausible deniability of, no, it wasn't us who was blocking. Because right now it is them who's blocking on a lot of things. I'm not saying it's going to be like that forever, but they really need to get out of the way in that sense to incentivize what we're trying to do.
Okay. I believe that the number one issue with our current economic stagnation is the industrial carbon tax. How can they walk away from that? Is it possible?
Anything's possible. Here's the thing, is like, anything is possible. The carbon tax could be gone tomorrow on the industrial side. It's gone look at how quickly the consumer carbon tax went away.
Certainly. How did he do that? What does he have to do? Wave a wand?
Yeah, literally, he just has to amend some legislation. That's
it. Does he need to get votes on it, or can he just do it?
Yeah, it's a vote, but he has a majority. So, and we have party discipline. So if you want to whip your liberal votes to vote in favor of this, the conservatives would obviously vote for it. You'd have opposition perhaps from the NDP, their nice little 6-person caucus, and the 30 or so block caucus. I actually don't know if it's 30 anymore. But,
so how many votes would they need? How many conservative seats are there?
There are enough votes that if Carney says to his caucus, we're getting rid of the industrial carbon tax, and I expect you to vote as such, they wouldn't need a single vote from any other political party. And it would be highly unusual for there to be vote your conscience on a piece of legislation like this. Like in Canada, if our party is voting for this in this certain way, we all vote this way. I'm not saying that happens all the time, but it would be highly unconventional for certainly everybody in cabinet would have to vote for it, and private MPs would be told to vote for it as well. That's how our system works.
Okay. And in your opinion, would that cost him a lot of political capital?
This is the thing, is like, where are you trying to build your base? Are you only trying to build your base in the champagne socialist crowds of downtown Toronto and Montreal? Or are you genuinely serious about building a base out in Western Canada? You get rid of the industrial carbon tax and take action on some of the infrastructure projects that you've promised, you can pick up votes in Alberta. You haven't been able to do so. You haven't been able to do so in the past. But again, you'll probably lose some votes in Toronto and in British Columbia, or those votes will just go back to the NDP, and you won't have the kind of seismic majority that you have, and you'll have to duke it out with the Conservatives again and have a competitive system, which isn't an inherently bad thing either. So this is the thing, is like, what game is Carney playing? Is Carney playing a game of, I don't actually care about being reelected, I'm going to actually do some things that are going to be lasting for this country? it is all within his power to do so. Now, this is the thing. We've now normalized floor crossing. So maybe Carney is worried about members of his caucus crossing the floor over to the NDP or leaving his, like, this is the other calculation is once you normalize floor crossing, then you are also subject to you being
going the other direction.
Yeah. So, I mean, is that something, but like, frankly, if he is serious,
he loses seats to the Bloc in Quebec. And then maybe the NDP in BC.
Well, yes, on the election side of things. But what I'm saying is, like, during this term before the next federal election, if he were to say, do something that much of his existing caucus didn't like, his existing caucus could decide that they're going to go join the Bloc or the NDP or start their own party as well, right? Like, he could lose, and then he may lose his majority as well, because he only has a 2% majority right now.
In your opinion, seats. What would be issues that would cause that?
Environment.
Okay, so the industrial
carbon tax.
Interesting. That puts us in a tough position.
Infrastructure projects.
So he needs less pipelines, more trains, high-speed rail. Okay. All right. So I understand conceptually how the federal government has to operate moving forward. I want to bring things closer to home, and I think that this ties into the market narrative that I want to talk through right now, and it is the AI infrastructure reality. Recently, there was this semi-Canadian viral article that was they're talking about this new 7+ gigawatt data center that could hypothetically be built in the Grand Prairie region. 7 gigawatts, just so people can kind of throw that, like, they can visualize that in their brain. 7 gigawatts is enormous. Like, it costs $30 to $40 billion to build out 1 gigawatt of data center. So to put that in perspective, that is probably the biggest infrastructure project that Canada could possibly take on. Now, 7 is outrageous. It's highly unlikely that is what it would start. It would be like incremental 500 megawatts here and then continuing to stack. Now, with that said, it is signaling, and I think that this is the current reality in this market, where you continue to see, and I think everybody's paying a little bit of attention to the new incremental improvement in the underlying base large language models that are occurring. Every single week, it seems like we have a new frontier model that's getting released. On the weekend, we had Mythos, which is Anthropic's new model that they are only releasing to a trusted 40 companies that they believe would not use it or weaponize the capabilities. As a result of that, we saw cloud companies like ServiceNow lose 20-ish% of their market cap. We saw cybersecurity companies get significantly whacked. It seems like every week there's a new company that is getting their, stock taken to the woodshed as a result of a new release. Meta is releasing their new frontier model, and it's said to be very, very competent and very good from a consumer perspective. You have Spud that is going to be released by OpenAI in the next week or so. The most interesting part about all of this is they're starting to constrict and withhold the frontier models from the consumer. And that to me points in a direction, which is it's not clear to everyone. I think everyone's just, it's very dangerous. This is scary. They're too good. That's why they're holding it back. When in reality, it's actually that they don't have enough compute. They don't have the infrastructure to serve these models to people. The cost of per million tokens of which maybe some people don't understand what the economics of the cost of a data center are, but they're usually measured in token input and output. And those tokens are ascribed to a dollar price, and that's how you kind of figure out the return on invested capital and economics of these data centers. Right now, you have Anthropic that is building as much as they possibly can. You had last year, most of the news was all about how OpenAI was signing contract after contract after contract with infrastructure players. And most of it was deemed unaffordable. But the reality is that these companies are growing their annual revenue run rates at such a staggering pace that they cannot serve the demand right now. And the market is currently trying to figure out where the heck it's going to come from. And if Canada or Alberta is serious about diversifying the economy, and becoming more dynamic economically, we need to take advantage of our advantages as a nation, which is we have great universities with very talented people that are all leaving to go to, not all, but a good portion of them are leaving to go to the United States. We need to bring them back, keep them here. But in order to do that, you need to give them projects to work on that are actually interesting and have economic upside. So when it comes to what the market is currently doing, how stock prices are performing, Alberta and to a greater extent, Canada has this really interesting opportunity where we have an abundance of natural gas and engineering talent. That is what Canada does very well, in addition to real estate prices going up. So are we going to take advantage of this? Is this going to be something that we get out of our own way? Because everything I saw as a response to that, the Wonderful project, they need to get rid of Mr. Wonderful out of this project because should have nothing to do with it. But everything I saw was, oh, this is bad for environment, bad. We have to get in the way of this project, bad. That, to me, is a politics issue that is going to continue to bog down Canada. But the opportunity doesn't abate. Like, this is very real. Look at the stock prices of Suncor, CNQ, some of the pipeline companies, Enbridge, TC Energy, Kinder Morgan, all doing very, very well. The opportunity is clear. These CEOs are doing more and more public speaking. Why? Because there's actual opportunity and there is a massive shift underway. And I guess this, more so than a statement, is a throwback to you. What do you think we can do about this? What is it that we need to do to get out of, or perhaps to take advantage politically? What can we do to actually make some money here from a Canadian perspective? Because I just don't know. I don't know if it's going to happen. This is the summer to get things done.
Yeah. Hot country summer. No, I'm joking. So I think that I'm just always making these serious talks less serious. Yeah. I think that the key thing and what Carney has to do more than take advantage of the sort of legislative regulatory policy power that he has is he has to recognize the fact that while we transition from like an ideological liberal government to an implementation liberal government, that he has this unique ability and position to just rewrite the narrative that society has latched onto when it comes to energy. Like, it strikes me as hilarious. You can hate energy, but do you hate energy and technology? And those have never been more linked than they are today. And I think that there's perhaps some people who do hate energy and technology, but those people don't belong, I would say, in 2026 in a mainstream political party. So again, you can go to the NDP or you can go to other parties if you feel like the Liberal Party is not serving you in that way. Giving bad advice that's not so great for the Conservatives. But I think that's Carney's responsibility, is he has actually this moral duty to advance that perspective. And part of, I think, well-placed criticisms of him is he wrote an entire book that suggests that's not a thing that he wants to do. So it comes to the question of, are you going to capitalize on the fact that if you stand up and tell the country that we made a mistake on industrial carbon tax, or we made a mistake on the regulatory burden and the way that we were approaching that when it comes to building big projects, people will believe you and you can actually move the needle from a like marketing PR perspective on that. But will you? And I think that's what is needed. He doesn't even have to
say he made a mistake.
Well, he didn't make the mistake, but I think that there is power in saying, listen, we thought that our world was going in a direction that it turns out it wasn't. And politics is all about what narrative you are sharing and convincing people of. And good politics recognizes, just as the Liberals have done with several issues, when the narrative that you're operating on is not the reality. And I think there is power in recognizing that there has been a change, and we're going to be the political party that looks at the world as it is, not the way that we wish it would be. And our first and number one priority is always going to be the well-being of Canadians. We obviously want to care about environment. We obviously want to care about all of those things. By the way, conservatives care about those things too, but we're going to do it in a way that doesn't make us a global South country in the process, when we had the ability to be one of the great upper middle world powers based on our energy stores and the human capital we have here in our relationship with the United States.
100% agree. So I want to extend off of this. And the reason why I wanted to hammer down on why this, like more specifically, this data center opportunities, or this specific one, but I think more are going to emerge as a result of this. The next emergent technology is going to be built around the infrastructure that is built in that moment. And interestingly, the 2010s and Silicon Valley specifically was built, and it's called Silicon Valley for a reason. It was built off of the boom in semiconductors of that previous generation. And then it transitioned into this tech hub that was a result of all of the exits and IPOs of that age. So a lot of folks might have heard of the PayPal mafia. All of those, like the Peter Thiels, the people that emerged from a company that had a bunch of very talented entrepreneurs that went public. When it goes public, all of their equity gets re-rated, and you now have a bunch of very, very wealthy people who then go on to start more businesses. As a downstream effect of PayPal, there was Palantir, there was YouTube, there was LinkedIn, there was Salesforce. There was all of these new emergent technologies. Tesla, SpaceX, like literally trillions and trillions of dollars of market cap value. That creates this continued feedback flywheel effect of investment, of new innovation, and then a continuation of more and more and more of that. If we want to see that again in Canada, you need to have the incentives to get that flywheel moving again. We have long gotten in the way of this wealth effect. It's because we almost feel as though it's naughty to be successful and wealthy. And if Alberta can take advantage, or Canada can take advantage of our cheap energy, our ability to build infrastructure and plants behind the meter, get rid of the grid issue, and I think emerge as a successful infrastructure builder for this new technology, there will be similar flywheel effects that you saw in the Silicon Valley. So if we can take advantage and start to build here, there is a really interesting opportunity that I think a lot of the progressive voting base of Canada has been clamoring for since I was a kid coming out of school. The diversify away from energy opportunity is very much here. And I want to talk about a few things that are currently happening in the software space that I think signals to us as investors and business operators of the opportunity here. Interestingly, code and software engineers has been the industry that has been disrupted the most by these new emergent technologies. It's because of the way in which the feedback loop happens. It's like these things write code very well because it's structurally very, very simple and then repeatable.
Yeah.
The other two industries more specifically, but that I want to talk to that are adopting this technology is healthcare services and law, interestingly. And if we take signal from that, I actually believe that Alberta has a unique opportunity because we have AHS, which is the largest grouping from a population base of data that is trainable that no part of the United States has access to. If we have the willingness to use our assets with the most emergent technology, plus our cheap energy and our ability to build, we can create kind of this new, unique, diversified technology that will be a new opportunity. So I suppose I call like this is where the market's headed. And we have this opportunity to kind of jump in and take the reins and run with it. That I like when I said at the beginning of this episode, this is the world is changing this year. This is a very, very big year for us. And I'm hopeful that like our politicians are going to recognize that and take advantage. I'm optimistic that we now have this majority that can move quicker, and I guess I'm emboldened by the reality, or at least I think the fact that Mark Carney is a very, very talented man, and hopefully he isn't what his book signals he is, and perhaps maybe more his business success signals he actually is. So this is me kind of like looping back into where the market is, how I see like our political landscape and where we're going to head. Now, I want to touch on our fourth segment here, because I do believe this is going to be problematic culturally for like the podcast is for millennials. I don't know about you, and I kind of want to get a back and forth with you here, how you're seeing your contemporaries, people that you're working with, how they're reacting to this technology, how they're implementing it in their day-to-day. I very recently went and lectured at one of the local universities here, and the sentiment from young folks about how this technology is being deployed across markets is, I think, concerning them. But interestingly, what I'm actually starting to see on my side, and then I'll throw it back to you, that young people are being hired because they are much more AI native. And the opportunity is for them to implement this tech because the older generation that has all the autonomy and the ability doesn't know how to wield it or understand it. So while I think that there's this like grouping of people that are scared and almost infuriated by the fact that it is, I think, eliminating a lot of these jobs that 22 to 28-year-olds would do generally. However, I believe there is quickly a new emerging opportunity for those white collar roles that perhaps were wiping out. We were wiping out the internships because AI can do that better. However, there's a new opportunity where these young folks are much more AI native. They're more technologically savvy. And if they can then help the older generation that kind of controls the economics of the business understand and implement, that will be their new role. And I tried to tell that story, but it was difficult for them to, maybe I just didn't do a great job, see that as being an encouraging opportunity and new job that is emerging. Are you seeing something similar on your end, or how exactly are you noticing folks utilize this? Or is it still kind of hush hush? I don't want to admit I'm using this tech.
I would say it's a combination of both. Like I would say that in my world, like the management consulting, like risk analysis, political world, that there is an acknowledgement that there is value in this. But I think that it's also, there's so many thoughts I have on this. There's like the way that you use this technology as well. So I can tell that people are using it in my world, and it's actually having an immediate negative effect in most circumstances because people are not using it in the way that you should be using it. Like from my perspective, this is a tool to use for inputs. And if you were going to charge somebody for advice or like strategy, then that part of it, even if it's only the last 25% of whatever you're doing, does need to have like a level of creativity that I don't know that AI has, at least in my world. I have not seen evidence in how I've been using these tools that the AI is like better at discernment in sensitive situations and what kind of thing. I still find that is very much a thing that I'm doing actively, but of course for research, for analysis on certain things, like I regularly will put legislation into an LLM and say, give me the top takeaways if I'm busy, things like that. Also, just in terms of the admin work and having agents and all of that kind of stuff, I think it creates more space for people to do the things that they are best at versus all the drag that we're used to. Mm-hmm. So I do think there's a bit of that. I do think, though, that when it comes to the adoption just generally, I think that there's kind of two groupings of people that would be hesitant to the adoption. And I think you're right in that 22 to 28-year-old age category. I think that these are sort of like coming of age COVID young adults that like really, I don't know if we gave them the short end of the stick or like they were raised to not take advantage of the long, I don't even know what happened with this group of people, but they are not experienced enough to actually have valuable contributions, and they are not in depth with AI enough to be able to substitute for that lack of competency on the other end. So I think they're being squeezed a little bit, and I agree with that. So I think there's some general fear of anti-capitalist, anti-energy consumption, I want a job and can't have one in that age group. And so that's an age thing. I think that there's also, you mentioned healthcare. In order for any of what you're talking about to actually be possible at scale, we have to have a conversation about unions and about things that are not politically expedient, right? And it goes back to the point that you were making on pessimists sound smart, optimists make money. We need to change our ethos in Canada away from it being cool to be a pessimist, like, oh, like I need to get XYZ and being defensive all the time. And we need to, I know that there's not really the incentives to do so right now. We need to give people the ability to feel comfortable to embrace this technology, because we're actually never going to be able, like healthcare, I agree with you. In theory, that's amazing. But and I'm not saying that the US has a better healthcare system than we do. I would not say that's true. But the US is going to see the upside of that, not Canada, because Canada has to deal with so much more drag and resistance than the US does. And in that context, that means that the US is going to get more of an upside in their system than Canada does. And again, we can decide that's a trade-off that we're willing to make. But the problem in Canada right now is I don't think we're making a conscious trade-off on that. We're just accepting the status quo without thinking about these things. So again, it comes back to that cultural shift that people like Carney and others, I think, have this moral responsibility to bring people who are hesitant along on.
Yeah, and interestingly for me, in my little financial world, what I'm viewing it's very exciting because now my total addressable market in terms of not necessarily clients, but where I can have a dynamic management style has expanded drastically, because I have the ability to run agents that will bring to me a similar level of market research and then modeling for the entire space, where I had to be very hyper focused in certain specific areas. And it allows for me to do a lot more individually and then from a team perspective than we ever possibly could have done in the past. It allows for us to scale to a level that would have been a 40-person team in the past. And that to me is just so darn exciting. And interestingly, from a hiring perspective, I'd prefer to find someone younger who has the ability to wield these tools and help me maintain them than somebody who perhaps I would have looked for in the past that was more operationally savvy and is able to do the day-to-day tasks that usually bog us down. And that is, to me, just a step function change in all of this. And to me, I think young people should be viewing that as being like, holy mackerel, this is actually where the puck's going. I need to recognize that, and I'm going to start to, again, teach myself, get to understand the technology so that I can then help those that are economically in control and would hire me for it. So I view this as I'm trying to reshape the way people think about the opportunity here, rather than being pessimistic about it. You need to view as like, how can I learn and then teach others and then benefit from it, right? So there is often the advice given that find yourself someone that you admire or perhaps is in a position of power, and figure out a way to make their life easier and better and more profitable, and that person will then reward you. That is often a very compelling piece of advice, I think, for young folks. And I don't think that has changed. We just have new technology.
That's the principle of always being willing to give value before you ask for value. And that is a principle that has been around for centuries. And it's that old advice that can now be applied in new circumstances that is just tried and true. And young people, I think, would be really well placed to listen to that in this context.
100%. And so now, like, marching back up to the political situation where, yeah, and I do kind of see where you're coming from with that. And I think you're right. Canada has to make a cultural change, and that's very difficult to do. And it's slow moving. We got here, we boiled ourselves, so to speak. Like we're the frog in boiling water.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our political system and then our values have done that to us, in a sense that we now we do not move fast and break things. We do not build. We've effectively just built a culture of disliking entrepreneurship or not valuing it.
It's a culture of lack, fundamentally.
Yeah. So that's not true for everybody either. That is just like broader the average, or that's the median, so to speak. So now, again, this is the year that the world changed, and there is amazing opportunity. I am very excited by it. From an investment perspective, our team is taking advantage of it. Luckily for me, I am not constrained by country or province from an investment mandate perspective, and that enables us to be very, very dynamic. It's fun. So I'm lucky I don't have to be bolted to Edmonton or to Calgary, in a sense, where this is where my political or my economic opportunity is. I have no other choice. These are the tools I have to play with. I'm lucky I can invest in Africa if I wanted to, if I felt like that was the opportunity. So I suppose if there's young folks listening, and if there's business operators out there, I think that there are incredible opportunities here to build infrastructure from a data center perspective, and then also to wield the technology, the software layer that's being built, the harnesses that are yet to be crafted, that will enable us to do wholly new things economically as a result of artificial intelligence that now seems to be growing at a pace in which I think most people didn't see coming. So, Mel, thank you for painting a political picture for me today. It was very helpful. I'm optimistic, and I'm hopeful that I'm going to be right in saying that I believe that Carney's going to end up being a great prime minister, and I'm very hopeful that he's going to be able to build a better Canada. But now that you've kind of laid it out, I see where he has to go, and I don't know. We'll see if he takes the steps.
Yeah, as you begin walking, the path appears, as they say.
Okay, well,
I just hope that in this Andreessen Horowitz chart that you've put in our notes, that lobbying does not fall into support or legal, but closer to like accounting. Because, like, you know, I'm a one-trick pony here, Joel. I gotta hopefully people still want my advice even when in the LLMs.
You know what? Quite frankly, I believe we are just getting closer and closer to the human, and the closer you are to that person, the more important your role is, and the more value accrues to that person. So specifically to the lobby side of things, do you anticipate that these LLMs will become our political overlords? Because I don't. I think that what people will crave, and I've sort of noticed this in my line of work, is that people, you know, whereas maybe 10 years ago, people were like, can you write me a briefing note on XYZ? People are really craving, like, I'm helping clients with high stakes, interpersonal, nuanced issues that require like just a level of like experience and like special touch almost that I don't know that LLMs will ever be able to replicate. And even if LLMs can replicate it, they won't give the feedback mechanism to the other human being that is inherent in some of these high stakes situations that I think is going to still be part of human life. So I'm hopeful. We'll see. I'll adapt if not. At the end of the day, they still currently service the human at the end. And I think that this is like very prescient and important. Matthew Prince was just at South by Southwest. He's the Cloudflare guy, and he was talking to this reality that agents are going to use the internet more than the humans do. Mm-hmm. And the rails in which they operate on and the amount of tokens generated or just activity that they're going to do behind the scenes for us is going to explode. So the infrastructure we're building is not for human beings to use, but for the agents that they build to use. And coming back to the individual careers and jobs to be done out there, truthfully, we're removing the data, I think busy work.
Yeah.
And then again, having more agency, understanding how the world works, how the systems work, and then building infrastructure and then harnesses that enable you to deliver a service, to have an outcome that people want, is what's currently being built out here. People, I believe the fear is certainly overblown at the moment. And it's only going to be fear is going to be what keeps people back. So you either, again, don't be scared of it. You have to run headfirst and get to know it, because I think that is the right decision, not the opposite. Don't run away. So, anyway.
Yes. And it all comes back to start with yourself. Emma Grade has a new book out. It's called Start With Yourself. Be the type of person that can adapt to these changes versus being static in the way that you are. And if you believe that you can handle these things, then you can.
Man, totally. I completely agree. Mel, Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Joel. I'll talk to you soon.
That's all for today. Thanks for listening. If you found this valuable, please subscribe and share it with a friend. As always, the information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered financial and/or tax advice. Please consult a licensed professional for your own personal situation. Joel is a registered portfolio manager and investment advisor, and clients of his and his firm may own securities discussed on this podcast.